When the Zarkon fleet appeared in Earth's skies on December 17, 2089, the world faced not only a physical threat, but a psychological blow unlike anything in human history. These colossal ships, each stretching over 8,000 kilometers, were more than symbols of overwhelming power. They were a silent declaration. Humanity had no chance against them. In New Horizon, the intercontinental capital of the human alliance, sunlight vanished entirely, leaving behind a pitch-black sky punctuated only by the red streaks of Zarkon engines. The sound emanating from these machines was unlike anything humans had ever heard, not the roar of jet engines or the blast of nuclear explosions, but a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through bones, like the breath of a titanic living entity observing its prey before delivering the final strike. Beneath the streets of New Horizon, chaos erupted instantly. Skyscrapers of glass and steel, once proud emblems of modern civilization, trembled under the sonic pressure of the Zarkon fleet. People flooded the streets out of instinct. Nobody knew what to do, but staying indoors felt more terrifying than facing the unknown outside. On the main boulevard, a middle-aged man in a suit, perhaps an office worker, screamed in panic, desperately pulling his young daughter from a stampeding crowd trampling over one another. Nearby, a group of university students stood frozen, phones in hand recording the fleet's image, as if uploading it to social media could help them comprehend the unfolding nightmare. At a street corner, an elderly priest knelt amidst swirling dust and smoke, clutching a crucifix tightly, murmuring prayers he hoped would pierce through the pandemonium. But no answer came from above, only darkness and the ever-growing roar. Within minutes of the fleet's arrival, every communication system on Earth was hijacked. From giant advertising screens in the streets to personal devices in every hand, the image of Calthor, Grand Marshal of Zarkon, appeared. This being was unlike anything humanity had ever conceived. Its tall, slender frame, estimated at about 3.5 meters, was encased in shimmering obsidian-like metallic armor, its curves resembling the veins of a living machine. Calthor's blazing red eyes were not just the sole light on its face, but twin forges of molten steel, piercing through screens into the minds of billions. When it spoke, the sound didn't come from its mouth, it echoed directly in the consciousness of every individual. I am Calthor, Grand Marshal of Zarkon. Earth now belongs to us. Kneel, or be erased. There were no elaborate threats, no lengthy explanations, just a cold command, as if humanity's existence were a trivial detail to be dealt with. Less than 10 minutes after the message, Zarkon acted. 3 brilliant blue beams lanced down from the fleet, targeting 3 strategic locations: Nova Europa, Pacific Reach, and Sahara Nexus. Nova Europa, a city emblematic of Western civilization, with museums and libraries preserving millennia of history, was transformed into a shimmering field of glass in an instant, smoke rising like the souls of its 8 million inhabitants snuffed out. Pacific Reach, the Pacific's bustling trade hub with vibrant ports and towering financial centers, disintegrated into ash, leaving a gaping hole in the ocean where a thriving coast once stood. Sahara Nexus, humanity's greatest military stronghold with dozens of underground bases and weapon stockpiles, was leveled completely, desert sand melting into glassy streaks stretching hundreds of kilometers. In total, over 20 million lives vanished in mere seconds, not an assault, but a demonstration of power, a warning that defiance against Zarkon meant annihilation. At the Global Defense Alliance, GDA, headquarters in New Horizon, leaders convened urgently in a bunker 500 meters underground, built to withstand even nuclear blasts. Commander-in-Chief Marcus Drayton, a tall man with silver hair and eyes sharp as blades, stood before the table, his voice ringing with resolve. We cannot surrender. We have the Orion Fleet, 127 destroyers equipped with next-generation plasma cannons, and micronuclear missiles. We can fight back. Beside him, General Elena Cortez of the South American Federation nodded, her hands gripping the chair's armrests as if to suppress her fear. But not everyone shared their optimism. Dr. Julian Harrow, GDA's chief scientific advisor, shook his head. We've never faced technology like this. Those ships, they're not just superior in size, but in energy. We don't even know how they function. How can we defeat them? The final decision was made. The Orion fleet would launch. Above the Atlantic, 127 gleaming silver ships streaked upward, leaving trails of brilliant light against the blackened sky. Each vessel was armed with plasma cannons capable of piercing 2-meter-thick titanium armor and micronuclear missiles packing 50 kilotons of TNT in a fist-sized package. For a few fleeting minutes, it seemed humanity might resist. Plasma beams struck a Zarkon ship's hull, sparking small explosions across its massive metal surface. But then, from the Zarkon fleet, purple energy waves emerged, not fired in bursts, but as a sweeping grid across space. They sliced through steel like a knife through butter, shredding the Orion fleet into fragments. In just 18 minutes, the entire force was incinerated, debris raining into the ocean like a meteor shower, leaving an empty sky and a humanity stunned by its own impotence. Zarkon didn't stop there. They broadcast a second message, this time with live footage from their mothership. Leaders of the 42 largest nations were dragged before cameras. President Elena Cortez, who had just approved the Orion launch, struggled to maintain her dignity as she was pulled forward, her long black hair disheveled, but her gaze defiant. Yet when a Zarkon warrior's gleaming blade swung, her head rolled to the ground, eyes still wide in disbelief, as if she couldn't fathom it was over. Prime Minister Hiroshi Tanaki of the Eurasian Union knelt, begging for mercy, tears streaming down his wrinkled face, his voice trembling. Please spare my people. But his pleas were futile. A sword pierced his chest, and he collapsed, red blood soaking the cold metal floor. One by one, from presidents to prime ministers, generals to scientists, they were publicly executed. Each death streamed live to every corner of Earth. This wasn't just slaughter, it was a meticulously calculated psychological strike. Armies disintegrated immediately after, thousands of soldiers discarding weapons and fleeing into deep forests or deserts, hoping to survive a few more hours. New Horizon, once a symbol of unity with its 15 million inhabitants, became a ruin, its streets choked with dust and the cries of children separated from their parents. Other cities followed suit. London drowned in flames from falling debris. Tokyo lay abandoned as people fled to the countryside, and Sao Paulo turned into a vast graveyard, hundreds of thousands perishing in the panicked stampede. Humanities were shattered like glass under a hammer. No one believed they could stand against Zarkon anymore. Yet in the shadows, a small group of unyielding survivors began to gather at an abandoned factory on New Horizon's outskirts. They weren't elite soldiers or brilliant scientists, just ordinary people fueled by burning hatred. Leading them was Lieutenant Colonel Elena Voss, a scarred GDA veteran from the 2070 war against rogue corporations. She had seen comrades die under nuclear fire and fought to her last breath in battles deemed hopeless, but she had never faced an enemy like Zarkon. Standing before her group, a mechanic, a nurse, a hacker, and a handful of others, she gripped an old rifle tightly, her raspy voice firm. They think we're done. They think we'll kneel and wait to die. But they don't know we have an ace up our sleeve, something even we fear. That ace wasn't in an advanced arsenal or secret lab, but buried deep beneath the Antarctic plateau in an underground prison codenamed Black Tomb. There lay Gideon Stahl, the Last Hunter, a name forbidden for 40 years, now humanity's final glimmer of hope in the depths of despair. Gideon Stahl once bore a real name, a simple one given by his parents John and Abigail Stahl, a farming couple from the vast North American plains. They dreamed of a peaceful life for their only son, perhaps as a doctor healing war's wounds, or an engineer rebuilding a world ravaged by decades of chaos. But that name and all their hopes were erased from every record in 2049, when Gideon became something humanity both revered and dreaded, the last hunter. He didn't choose this path. War chose him, and he turned it into a lethal art no one could match. Gideon's journey began in the early 21st century as a scrawny teenager joining the Global Defense Alliance, GDA, special forces during the war against the Global Crime Syndicate, GCS. The GCS wasn't a nation or conventional army, it was an international web of criminal corporations, warlords, and rebels that drove the world to the brink with terrorist attacks, bioweapon smuggling, and decades-long proxy wars. Gideon enlisted not out of patriotism or heroic ambition, but for a simple reason: survival. Yet in those years, he discovered he wasn't just good at surviving, he was better at killing than anyone else. His first missions were brutal tests of body and mind. At 19, he was sent to the Gobi Desert to dismantle a GCS base with a team of 5. The mission failed, his squad wiped out except for Gideon. He survived by burying himself in the sand for 3 days, without water or food, armed only with a dagger and an iron will. When reinforcements arrived, they found the enemy base eradicated, 50 GCS gunmen burned to death in their tents. No bullets fired, only traces of fire and precise, chilling knife wounds. No one knew how Gideon did it, and he never told. From then on, his reputation spread in whispers, not as a soldier, but as a phantom. Over the next 15 years, Gideon became the GDA's secret weapon, a razor-sharp blade deployed on missions no one else dared take. He worked alone, relying not on technology or air support, but on himself, an old dagger, and a mind as keen as its edge. One of his most legendary feats came in 2041, when he was sent to the Alps to assassinate Viktor Drakov, a notorious warlord who had controlled Europe's clean water supply for a decade. Drakov's mountain fortress was guarded by 200 gunmen, automated defenses, and 3-meter-thick steel walls. Gideon carried no guns or explosives. He scaled the icy cliffs at night with just a rope and bare hands. By morning, local resistance found Drakov hanging from his bedroom ceiling. No sign of entry, no sound. His entire guard force remained alive but fled, abandoning the fortress in terror. Gideon didn't just kill, he dissected his enemies from within. He studied them, finding weaknesses others missed. With Drakov, he saw the warlord feared not bombs or guns but powerlessness, and Gideon made him a symbol of defeat before ending him. In South America, he eradicated a drug cartel's leadership by poisoning their water with a paranoia-inducing drug, driving them to slaughter each other in madness. He understood war wasn't won with brute force, but with the mind sowing fear, breaking wills, and collapsing foes before his blade even struck. But when peace arrived in 2049, after the GCS's total defeat, humanity turned on Gideon. GDA leaders, who once hailed him as a necessary demon, grew terrified of his power. They feared that one day, this blade might turn against them, not because Gideon would betray, but because he was too adept at destroying designated threats. No trial, no public statement. On an October night in 2049, he was seized from his small New Horizon apartment. He didn't resist as the strike team blindfolded and cuffed him, staying silent as they took him to the Black Tomb, a prison 3,000 meters beneath the Antarctic plateau. Built to contain threats beyond human control, it had no windows, no light, just cold steel walls and absolute silence. Even the guards didn't know who they watched. They were ordered to shoot anything that tried to escape. In the Black Tomb's darkness, Gideon didn't go mad or break like other prisoners. He sat cross-legged on the stone floor, eyes closed, breathing steady as a machine programmed to wait. He didn't await freedom or death, he awaited a worthy foe, a challenge big enough to pull him from the abyss humanity had cast him into. For 40 years, his body aged, his long hair turned silver, his skin hardened from lack of light, but his mind and will stayed razor sharp. He harbored no resentment for his imprisonment. He knew the rules. When war ends, the executioner is the first to go. When Zarkon struck, Elena Voss and her team, 12 seasoned mercenaries, undertook a desperate mission to free him. They crossed the Antarctic ice in an armored snow tractor, braving minus 60-degree cold and blizzards that could flay flesh. Reaching the Black Tomb, they breached its doors with thermal explosives, descending through damp, ice-crusted corridors where the air was so heavy each breath felt like swallowing lead. The final steel door to Gideon's cell, over a meter thick and locked with advanced military encryption, took Voss and her team's hacker 20 tense minutes to crack. When it swung open, their flashlights illuminated Gideon. He sat cross-legged, eyes shut, his tall, lean frame solid as a forgotten steel statue. His silver hair spilled over his shoulders, gnarled hands rested lightly on his knees, and though over 70, he radiated a fearsome strength not of muscle, but of an unbreakable will. Voss stepped forward, her voice trembling despite her effort to hide it. "We need you. The world's collapsing." Gideon opened his eyes, gray pupils cold as steel, sweeping over her and her team in silence. He didn't ask about Zarkon, the devastation, or the losses. Only one question slipped from his cracked lips, deep as an echo from the abyss. "How many need to die?" Voss's team froze, none daring to answer immediately. They knew who he was not from official records, but from whispered army tales, legends of a demon who saved humanity only to be forsaken by it. Voss took a deep breath, stepping closer. "Billions. An alien empire is wiping us out. You're our last shot." Gideon's expression didn't shift, but a cold glint flashed in his eyes, not hope or compassion, but the thrill of a hunter scenting blood after 40 years in chains. When Gideon Stahl was extracted from the Black Tomb, the journey back to New Horizon was no simple trip. It was a race against time and despair. Elena Voss and her team used an armored snow tractor to cross the Antarctic ice, but upon reaching land, they switched to a battered transport ship seized from Zarkon by resistance fighters. Throughout the journey, Voss recounted everything to Gideon. The Zarkon fleet's arrival with gargantuan ships blotting out the sky, the blue beams that erased 3 major cities in seconds, and the public massacres of world leaders broadcast live. She spoke of the devastation, billions dead or fleeing, cities once symbols of civilization reduced to ash, and Zarkon's arrogance, viewing humans as mere insects beneath their feet. Gideon listened, seated still on a metal bench in the ship's hold, gnarled hands clasped, face stone cold. Not a muscle twitched, but in his icy gray eyes, Voss glimpsed an odd light, not empathy or rage, but the keen calculation of a mind already dissecting its new prey. When the ship touched down at a resistance bunker on New Horizon's outskirts, Voss's team led Gideon into a makeshift war room, its walls scrawled with crude tactical maps and flickering screens replaying Zarkon's attacks. Carlos Rivera, a military engineer and the only team member with experience in GDA's cutting-edge tech, approached with a suitcase of advanced weapons, plasma rifles firing armor-piercing energy, sonic knives with vibrating blades, and molecular grenades capable of leveling a building within a 50-meter radius. "You'll need these," Rivera said, voice shaky as he set the case before Gideon. "Zarkon's unlike anything we've faced. Their armor regenerates. Their weapons slice steel like paper." Gideon glanced at the arsenal, then pushed it aside without opening it. "I don't need tools," he said, his voice a low rumble from the depths. "I am the tool." Rivera opened his mouth to argue, but Voss raised a hand for silence. She knew debating Gideon was pointless. Yet Gideon didn't rush into battle like a bloodthirsty warrior. Before acting, he made one demand: to see a captured Zarkon alive. The resistance had snared a Zarkon warrior in a rare ambush in South Africa's plains, where a patrol ship was downed by leftover GDA anti-air guns. The creature was caged in reinforced steel, standing over 3 meters tall, its self-regenerating armor glinting like spilled oil under the bunker's dim lights. Its arms were unnaturally long, each finger ending in sickle-like claws, and its red eyes blazed like twin furnaces in the dark. As Gideon entered the cell, the Zarkon growled, its voice grating like metal on stone. "Humans are insects. You cannot touch us. My empire will grind this planet to dust." It spat a glob of purple slime at him, but Gideon didn't flinch. He stood 2 meters from the cage, gray eyes studying every detail. For the next 15 minutes, Gideon said nothing. He noted how the Zarkon moved, slight muscle twitches beneath its armor as it snarled, its breathing quickening as the room's air grew heavy, its red eyes faltering whenever he tilted his head as if analyzing it. He spotted what Voss's team missed. The Zarkon grew uneasy under prolonged scrutiny, its shoulders hunched, claws tightened on the bars, a faint sign of discomfort. After observing, Gideon stepped closer, mere centimeters from the cage, and smiled, not a friendly or triumphant smile, but a chilling, almost inhuman one. "You have a weakness," he whispered, soft enough for only the Zarkon to hear. "And I've seen it." The creature recoiled half a step, feeling unease for the first time, not from weapons or strength, but from the gaze of a being it had deemed inferior. Gideon didn't target Zarkon's main fleet. That's what any strategist would do, and what Zarkon expected and prepared for most. He knew a frontal assault on those behemoths, with armor kilometers thick and energy cannons that could raise continents, was suicide. Instead, he aimed for their nerve center, the high command on the Vortex Prime, a space fortress hovering 50 kilometers above Earth. It housed Zarkon's generals and tacticians directing the invasion, designed to be impregnable with plasma-resistant armor that could withstand a supernova, automated defenses with thousands of heat and motion sensors, and elite soldiers guarding it round the clock. To Zarkon, the notion of a lone human without tech or an army breaching it was laughable, unworthy of precaution. But Gideon cared little for their laughter. He convinced Voss's team to get him onto a Zarkon cargo ship, captured by the Resistance in a North Atlantic raid. Damaged but flyable, it had once hauled Zarkon supplies. Gideon didn't disguise himself as a soldier or officer. He hid in the cargo hold among the corpses of Zarkon warriors killed in the ambush. The stench of blood and scorched metal filled the compartment, but Gideon remained unfazed, lying still, breathing slow as if dead, waiting for the ship to return to Vortex Prime to report its defeat. When it docked at the mothership's bay, Zarkon inspectors saw only a pile of bodies and moved on, unaware one still lived. Gideon slithered from the corpses as the inspection hall emptied, his body smeared with Zarkon's purple blood, but his eyes sharp as knives. He carried no guns or bombs, just an old dagger, its worn steel edge honed to cut through bone. He moved through Vortex Prime shadows like a wraith, exploiting blind spot sensors couldn't reach and narrow vents the hulking Zarkon never considered. The first Zarkon officer to spot him, a mid-tier commander named Crosshole, stood 3.5 meters tall, patrolling the main corridor with 2 guards. Crosshole sneered, baring saw-like teeth. "A lost rat. What do you think you can do here?" It swung a muscular arm, claws slashing with speed to tear steel apart. But Gideon wasn't there to be caught. He dodged in a split second, then drove his dagger into the joint between Crosshole's armored elbow, a tiny weakness he'd noted in the caged Zarkon. The arm hit the floor, purple blood gushing like a fountain, Crosshole's pained roar echoing down the hall. The guards charged, but Gideon vanished into the dark, footsteps light as a breeze. When they turned back, Crosshole lay dead, throat slit cleanly, red eyes dimming in shock. The rest of the high command heard alarms blare minutes later, but by then, Gideon was deeper inside the fortress, leaving a trail of blood and the first sparks of panic in his wake. He didn't kill them all, that wasn't necessary. Instead, he spared one, a senior officer named Vraxis, kneeling amid his comrades' bodies in Vortex Prime's main briefing room. Vraxis, in gleaming armor with a now useless energy sword, stared at Gideon, red eyes clouded with fear. Gideon crouched, his blood-dripping dagger resting lightly on Vraxis's shoulder, and growled, "Tell them the hunt has begun." He didn't need to shout. His low voice pierced the armor, searing into Vraxis's mind, turning the proud officer into a trembling wreck in seconds. News of Gideon Stahl's assault on the High Command aboard the Vortex Prime mothership reached the Zarkon Supreme Council in less than an hour, not through official channels, but through the panicked whispers of survivors. Vraxis, the sole senior officer to survive the massacre, was brought before the council, a group of 12 elite strategists and generals who had conquered thousands of worlds over millennia. Once a proud warrior standing 3.5 meters tall, clad in obsidian-like shimmering armor, Vraxis now knelt before his leaders, his glowing red eyes dimmed by fear, his voice trembling as he recounted the horror. "It wasn't human," he stammered, claws gripping the metal floor so hard they left deep gouges. "It was a phantom, a living blade. We didn't see it coming, didn't hear a thing, until blood flooded the deck." The council sat in silence, but not out of belief. They mocked him, viewing his failure as the weakness of an unworthy Zarkon. General Korgith, a towering 4-meter figure with a voice like rolling thunder, roared, "A lone human? You expect us to believe dozens of elite officers were slain by a creature with no technology, no army? You're a disgrace to the Empire." Their scorn faded fast when footage from Vortex Prime's surveillance system arrived. The Council's massive screens replayed the chilling scene. The mothership's main corridor, once a symbol of invincibility, now awash in Zarkon's purple blood. Krozhul, a mid-tier commander, lay crumpled, his arms severed and throat slashed with surgical precision, red eyes wide in shock. His guards sprawled around him, each felled by a single knife wound, no signs of guns, bombs, or modern weaponry. The cameras caught only a blurred figure moving through the shadows, too swift for sensors to track, before vanishing entirely. The laughter stopped. Korgith slammed a fist on the table, shaking the room, but his voice now carried a trace of doubt. "This is unusual. But it's just one being. We have a fleet, millions of warriors. It can't change the grand scheme." But Gideon didn't need to shift the grand scheme with armies or weapons. He did it with fear. After the Vortex Prime strike, he didn't linger to face the counterforce Zarkon would surely deploy. Instead, he vanished, only to reappear where they least expected. 3 days later, a Zarkon patrol ship over the Pacific lost contact. Rescue teams found its 80-strong crew dead in the cockpit, throats cut with exacting precision, the command chair drenched in purple blood. No breach detected, no alerts from defenses. 2 days after, a weapons depot in South Africa housing thousands of energy cannons and plasma grenades lay ruined from within. Zarkon bodies hung from racks, eyes frozen in terror, as if they'd seen something beyond comprehension. The peak came at a senior officer's retreat in the Atacama Desert, where 15 Zarkon commanders vanished overnight, leaving only their armor and weapons scattered on the sand, purple blood seeping into the parched earth. Each attack was a calculated psychological blow. Gideon didn't kill indiscriminately. He targeted key figures in Zarkon's command structure, from mid-level officers to top strategists. He didn't destroy warships or factories, things that could be rebuilt, but struck at their minds, sowing the dread that nowhere was safe, no one untouchable. A week after his first strike, Zarkon soldiers began refusing patrols. A 50-strong squad in the Arctic, ordered to hunt Gideon after his footprints were found near their camp, chose mass suicide with their own plasma grenades over facing an unseen death in the dark. In Europe's plains, hundreds of Zarkon warriors fled Earth in small escape pods, preferring execution by the Supreme Council for desertion over staying on this planet. For the first time in their thousand-year history of conquest, Zarkon, a race that proclaimed itself the ultimate predator, felt fear spreading through its own ranks. Zarkon's panic stemmed not just from the deaths, but from how Gideon turned them into symbols. A commander named Zarvok was found hanging in a South American base's meeting room, a rope fashioned from his own armor straps, red eyes staring as if still fixed on his killer. Another general, Clyther, was discovered in an Indian Ocean Patrol ship's command bay, his ceremonial sword plunged through his chest, hands still gripping the hilt as if he'd ended himself in despair. These weren't mere eliminations, they were messages. You can't run, can't hide, can't win. The Supreme Council ordered heightened security, installing thousands more sensors and dispatching elite assassin squads to track Gideon, but all efforts proved futile. He was a phantom, a nightmare uncatchable and unkillable, eroding Zarkon's confidence with each passing day. Meanwhile, humanity pushed to the edge of despair in the invasion's early days began to rise from the ashes. Word of Gideon's strikes spread through the Resistance's covert channels, from small bands in deep forests to hidden underground bases. In an abandoned factory outside New Horizon, Elena Voss stood before 200 Souls mercenaries, workers, farmers, and played the only recording her team had of Gideon, his low, chilling laugh from interrogating a captured Zarkon. The cold, emotionless sound echoed through the room, raising goosebumps but igniting a spark of hope. If one man can make them tremble, Voss said, her raspy voice resolute, what can millions do? Guerrilla attacks erupted worldwide, emulating Gideon's tactics. In South Asia, a resistance group blared his laugh over loudspeakers at night, sending 300 Zarkon soldiers fleeing their outpost, abandoning weapons and gear for the rebels to claim. In North America, a 50-man militia hit a Zarkon supply station, using knives and traps instead of guns, killing 20 before they could react a precise, ruthless, psychological blow, Gideon's way. In Africa, survivors from Sahara Nexus's ruins launched night ambushes, using flashlights and mirrors to disorient Zarkon troops, who panicked and fired on each other in the dark. These strikes couldn't repel Zarkon's fleet, but they achieved what Gideon intended, turning fear into humanity's weapon. Humanity's spirit shifted. Children stopped crying in bunkers, instead sketching Gideon on walls, a gaunt figure with silver hair and a bloodied knife, a war god of legend. Adults whispered his name not with a hero's reverence, but the awe reserved for an uncontrollable tempest. Gideon didn't fight for fame or compassion, he fought because he was a hunter, and Zarkon was the greatest prey he'd ever faced. Yet whatever his reasons, he accomplished what no one else could, convincing humanity they weren't just victims. If one man could turn conquerors into the hunted, what could billions do? Fear ceased to be humanity's burden, it became Zarkon's nightmare. On the 15th day of the invasion, the Zarkon Empire plunged into unprecedented desperation. The Supreme Council, once arrogantly proclaiming Earth would kneel within hours, now faced the reality that a lone figure, Gideon Stahl, had shaken the foundations of their millennia-old dominion. Generals vanished, soldiers deserted, and fear spread like a plague through their ranks. In a frantic bid, the Council activated the Vortex of Destruction, a supreme weapon mounted on their flagship, Eclipse Sovereign. This wasn't an ordinary weapon, it was a colossal space machine, 200 kilometers wide, engineered to unleash an energy storm that could erase all life on a planet in 12 hours, reducing Earth to a lifeless orb devoid of civilization's trace. Zarkon had used it to obliterate hundreds of Defiant worlds before, and now they resolved that if they couldn't conquer Earth, no one would possess it. They broadcast an ultimatum across humanity's remaining channels. Surrender immediately, or your planet will cease to exist. But Calthor's voice, the Grand Marshal Supreme, lacked its initial arrogance. It quavered, halting, as if he himself couldn't believe the tide had turned so drastically. The message came from a dim command chamber on Eclipse Sovereign, where Calthor stood amid flickering screens and the whining hum of the vortex powering up. Human resistance intercepted the signal, and Elena Voss, catching the desperation in Calthor's tone, sent an urgent message to Gideon via a covert comms device. They're playing their last card. You need to act now. Gideon, concealed in an abandoned North Atlantic outpost, received the message. He wasn't surprised. He'd anticipated Zarkon would resort to a doomsday weapon when cornered. His reply was brief, broadcast across every Zarkon channel the Resistance had hacked. I'm coming. His low, emotionless voice reverberated through thousands of warships and barracks, making once invincible warriors tremble in their armor. He didn't wait for negotiations or resistance plans. That wasn't his way. Alone, Gideon boarded a damaged but functional transport craft and headed straight for Eclipse Sovereign, where the vortex glowed with red light, illuminating the night sky. Eclipse Sovereign was Zarkon's final bastion, fortified beyond human imagination. Its outer armor, 5 kilometers thick and made of self-regenerating alloy, could withstand a supernova. Automated cannons fired purple energy grids, annihilating anything within a 100-kilometer radius. Thousands of elite warriors, 3 to 4 meters tall, patrolled inside with hypersonic weapons and plasma-resistant armor. But Gideon cared nothing for its impregnability. He infiltrated via a transport system flaw, a wrecked rescue ship returning from Earth, laden with Zarkon corpses. Hidden among the bodies, purple blood coating him, he slipped out as it landed, moving through icy metal corridors like a specter. Zarkon's elite detected him as alarms blared too late. Gideon didn't fight like a typical soldier. He was a living nightmare. A 20-strong assassin team, trained to crush armies, charged with energy swords and plasma guns. He dodged their beams with unearthly speed, his old dagger slicing through armor joints, weaknesses he'd spotted in his first interrogation. One fell, throat slit before it could scream. Another crumpled as Gideon turned its own sword against it, piercing its chest. They died silently, in agony, and above all, in fear, their once unshakable pride shattered by a man needing no modern arms to kill. He pressed deeper into Eclipse Sovereign's core, where Calthor awaited in the command chamber. Over 5 meters tall, clad in gleaming ceremonial armor, Calthor gripped a 6-meter energy sword hissing like thunder, the last emblem of Zarkon's might. Who do you think you are? He roared, swinging with force to shatter a building. Gideon didn't answer. He dodged, swift as a ghost, his dagger flashing in the dark. One strike pierced Calthor's knee joint, dropping the giant with a gush of purple blood. Another severed a neck nerve, the sword clattering to the floor. Calthor snarled, struggling to rise, but his body failed him. He looked up, red eyes fading with fear. For the first time in centuries, death loomed near. This is how empires fall, Gideon said, his voice a grave judgment. Raising Calthor's own sword, he drove it through the Titan's chest, ending an alien king's reign. With Calthor's death, the Grand Marshal Supreme, Zarkon's fleet unraveled in chaos unseen before. Eclipse Sovereign, the colossal mothership once a beacon of unassailable power, became a drifting coffin as surviving officers vied for control. Without Calthor or the Supreme Council systematically eliminated by Gideon in prior days, Zarkon lost its command core, and there will the fight crumbled. Warships thousands of kilometers long, which had darkened Earth's skies, began retreating from the solar system, not in an organized withdrawal, but a panicked flight, crashing into each other in space, leaving vast metal wreckage adrift among the stars. Thousands of Zarkon corpses littered the ground, purple blood seeping into the rubble of ruined cities, a cold reminder that the conquerors had become the hunted. Humanity endured, but at a staggering cost. New Horizon, Nova Europa, Pacific Reach, once thriving centers of civilization, lay in ashes, with over 4 billion dead from the invasion. Survivors crawled from bunkers and forests, eyes hollow but slowly brightening as word spread. Zarkon had fled. Yet Gideon Stahl didn't stay to witness this fragile freedom. After slaying Calthor, he left Eclipse Sovereign in a small escape craft, landing in Greenland's icy wastes, and vanished into the shadows. On the mothership's command chamber wall, the Resistance found a message carved with his dagger: "Don't come back." No one knew where he went. Some said he returned to the Black Tomb for a long slumber. Others believed he hid among the survivors, awaiting a new foe. Gideon sought neither glory nor gratitude. He was a hunter, and with his prey gone, he had no reason to linger. But Gideon's tale didn't end on Earth. Rumors of humanity's triumph rippled across the galaxy, carried by covert channels of races once enslaved by Zarkon. They whispered of a tiny planet that turned conquerors into prey, of a nameless specter that made the universe's mightiest empire tremble. Other alien powers, from the Drakon coalition in the Andromeda cluster to the Silthar dynasty on Orion's frontier, began steering clear of the solar system, seeing Earth not as a feeble world but a latent threat. In cosmic taverns and interstellar war councils, the pursuer was spoken of with awe. No one knew who he was, but all understood he was an unstoppable terror. On Earth, Gideon became a symbol beyond human grasp. The Resistance, led by Elena Voss, began rebuilding from the wreckage, but they didn't hail him as a traditional hero. He wasn't a savior, he was a living warning that humanity could outmatch any foe in ruthlessness. Children drew him on ruined walls, a gaunt figure with silver hair and a bloodied knife, gray eyes piercing the dark. Adults murmured his name on long nights, not with gratitude, but with reverence for a force they dared not touch. Gideon gave humanity freedom, yet left a gnawing question. If he could do this to Zarkon, who could stop him if he turned on them? Gideon's legacy wasn't just Earth survival, it was a declaration that humanity doesn't kneel, it hunts. Later historians dubbed this conflict the Great Pursuit, not for victories of armies or tech, but for one man who made fear the ultimate weapon. The universe would never forget Gideon Stahl, not as a name, but as a shadow, a promise that any who dared invade Earth would find only death in the dark.